And again, I'm Dan Dranko with Tennessee Alliance for Progress, and one of the major co-sponsors of this new Green Economy Compass Conference, along with the Nashville Peace and Justice Center and the Wendland Cook Program for Religion, Labor, and Ecology. And we've got another 20 or so great co-sponsoring organizations. And this conference, and these workshops are going to be the foundation for our organizing here in Tennessee and around the Southeast, particularly with groups like the Southeast Climate and Energy Network that we're going to be joining in with a lot of organizing. And so we're just kind of joining into the cause here in Tennessee. We've done a lot of great work around climate organizing and green jobs over the last years, but we're looking at this 2021 is as much of the country is for a real launch into our new into a new reality in terms of all this that links climate protection with energy justice, environmental justice, and social justice, and so and good well-paying jobs. And so we will be recording this, and so if you don't want to see your face, if you don't want your face to be shown nationally, you might want to come off, but otherwise it's great to see you. Some of you are coming in as Aaron Stauffer, so if you want to, that's just our Zoom doing something odd. So if you want to click on your name, you can rename yourself. Again, most of you are probably familiar with Zoom, but if you click on the top corner where it says view, you can click on speaker, and that's probably best to watch the workshops. You will all be muted unless we unmute you for to ask a question or something moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Abigail and welcome everybody.
All right, hey y'all. Like Dan said, my name is Abigail Franks, and I work for the Southeast Climate Energy Network and also the People's Justice Council. I am super pumped to be here. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your day. We're going to listen to some amazing expertise that Shiva, Rev Leo, and Chandra have. We're going to begin with everyone giving a brief introduction about themselves because, as you've probably seen on the program, these amazing people have very long and accomplished bios. So I think it's best to leave it to them. And then I'm going to ask some questions, and then we're going to leave some space to make sure that y'all can ask questions as well. So first, I would like to start off with Reverend Leo introducing himself, followed by Shiva, and then Miss Chandra. Take it away, Leo.
I'm Reverend Leo Woodberry. I'm the pastor of Kingdom Living Temple in Florence, South Carolina. Also executive director of New Alpha Community Development Corporation. And I'll just shorten it all by saying this is the 30th year that I've been involved with environmental justice and climate change. So that's why the bio is a little long. So thank you very much for this amazing opportunity.
And thank you, Leo, for your 30 years of work. The planet and the people, thank you. Take it away, Shiva. If someone could unmute him as well.
Unmute me.
Here we go. Hey, everyone. My name is Shiva Patel. I've spent the last about a decade working as an energy and climate justice organizer. Very much a student of a lot of the leaders and mentors, like the other panelists on this call, Reverend Leo and Chandra. It's very good to see a lot of familiar faces and new faces. I also serve as a co-chair of the Advancing Equity and Opportunity, Democratizing Rural Electric Co-ops Collaborative. I'm on the leadership team of the Energy Democracy Leadership Institute based out of North Carolina. And here today, I'm going to be speaking very much as a participant of the Tennessee Valley Energy Democracy Movement, which I think will be very exciting to share and discuss with you all. So I'll leave that there and also just mention that I'm based in Oakland, California, but I hail from Indian ancestry in rural India, but was also born in South London, and my parents migrated to Florida. So sort of all these connections, but bring it together. I'm very excited to be here today.
I mean, you've been all over the world, and the fact that you're here with us is a blessing. Thank you, Shiva, for everything. And Chandra, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chandra Farley. I'm the Just Energy Director at Partnership for Southern Equity. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia. However, I am a Tennessean. I was born and raised in Gallatin, Tennessee, which is about 40 minutes north of Nashville. So I'm super excited to be a part of the group today. And we'll get into Partnership for Southern Equity a little bit later. As Shiva mentioned, in addition to our included in our coalition building work is a regional coalition of organizers and advocates working together through advancing equity and opportunity. And that is how I have gotten to know Bree Nisley with App Voices, and looking forward to talking about more of that today and meeting some new folks, and glad to see some familiar faces.
Thank you, Chandra. And again, thank y'all. I am honored to be around such awesome people doing awesome work. So let's begin with some of the questions. I want everyone to answer this. So Kendall, if you could please, if you're involved with tech, make sure that Leo, Shiva, and Chandra are unmuted. I can start. We'll start with Leo again. We'll go in the same order to make sure everybody answers. But I wanted to start off by asking, what is energy democracy and why is it important for the South?
So, let's start with the word democracy. We know that the word democracy is based on the Greek word demos, which means people. And so there's all kinds of ways that people can govern. We have autocracies, we have plutocracies, we have theocracies, aristocracies. But in this case, we're talking about people ruling. And in this particular country and many other democratic societies, that means that the people rule through their the choices that they make in terms of policymakers. And those policymakers are supposed to reflect the wishes, the desires, and the needs of energy. So basically, it's the exact opposite of what we have now. We'll talk a little bit more about, oligarchical monopolies and the systems that are currently in place that prevent people from having a choice in how their energy is generated and delivered to their homes. And that's what energy democracy is, having a choice in terms of how energy is generated and delivered.
Wow, thank you, Leo. I love how you got it. You took it from a very broad sense of defining democracy and putting it right down to the cause of a lot of our energy issues in the South. Shiva, can you add on to that, please?
Yeah, sure. So building off of Leo, I want to just pull a definition from the Energy Democracy book, which was, co-edited by Denise Fairchild and Al Weinreb. And here it is. Energy democracy is a way to frame the struggle of working people, low-income communities, and communities of color to take control of energy resources and decision-making from the energy establishment and use those resources to empower their communities, right? So very much in line with what Rev Leo said. And building off of that, it really means a decentralized energy system, one that is, the main feature is community control and ownership, and very much looking at this as a shared resource that is developed, with the Earth's ecosystems and the broader sort of ecosystem at large. And to me, I think, it's particularly important for the South because, as many of the issues when it comes to energy burdens and climate and economic injustices very much show up in the South disproportionately more than the rest of the country. And we also see that there's a disproportionate sort of lack of investment or sort of underinvestment in particular as well in the South. And so I think you have sort of a lot of these colluding, convening factors, but you also have a lot of amazing, incredible community-led solutions, right, coming from the South, coming from many of you on this call. And so I think if you put all of that together, I think that's what makes energy democracy very critical to the South, because it really is a channel or a lever to achieve that vision that Rev Leo has laid out, and I was building off of with that, the definition from the Energy Democracy book.
Wow. Thank you, Shiva. I wish, I hope someone is taking notes so I can really read over those words again. Talking about the important, not only is energy democracy important for people because energy is a right, but also the South is a perfect example of the lack of energy democracy that we have. So thank you very much for bringing that up. Chandra, would you like to build on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are definitely building upon each other, Reverend Woodberry, talking about people. I mean, this is about people work. And Shiva, I had the same definition, teed up. We've been working together with the Energy Democracy Project, spurred by Dr. Fairchild and Al Weinraub's book for the last couple of years now. And I think a great way to build on that, and really how PSE views energy democracy, we really talk about growing a movement for just energy. And we're, as a movement building organization, we utilize what we refer to, our theory of change at PSE is around developing the equity ecosystem. And it's really all about mobilizing advocacy and mobilizing people around issues of energy equity. And we define energy equity as the fair distribution of the benefits and burdens of energy production and consumption. And, to Shiva's point, we can look at any indicator, any equity indicator that you want to look at, and you will see the growth in equities, across race, and then of course across class. And so that is where we start. At Partnership for Southern Equity, I'm always very clear to say we're a racial equity organization. We're not an environmental organization. So as a racial equity organization, we're working at the intersection of race and racial equity and energy and climate, which is the work that I lead, equitable development, economic inclusion, and health equity. And our logo is a circle for a reason. All of these things are interconnected, and all of those issue areas impact when we talk about energy democracy, when we talk about a just transition, when we talk about a just transformation of our systems from a fossil fuel-based economy to a clean energy economy. It's critical that we address all of these issues to make sure that, this struggle, this energy democracy struggle that we are talking about can fully deliver upon the benefits and promises that we all work together to advance, that we know can really stand to shift those embedded historical, structural, racist inequities on their head, so we can start fresh and move forward together.
Wow. I love the term you use, equity ecosystem, and talking about the intersections of everything, especially with energy democracy and racial issues and class issues, all of it. It's very, very important. Thank you so much. And you actually are transitioning to our next question perfectly. I wanted to know more about the work that y'all do. I mean, y'all are all very unique, but similar in a sense of the work that you're doing for energy democracy. So Reverend Leo, can you tell us more about the work that you've done? I know we can only cover 30 years of work in a couple minutes, but we would love to hear more about your work.
Okay, so let's talk primarily about how we empower communities, particularly environmental justice communities, which are defined as people of color communities, low-income communities, communities that are environmentally vulnerable, environmentally overburdened, or tribes. So one of the things that we've done since 2015 is that we've conducted a Train the Trainer. So we've trained people from Mississippi, Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia, and how to teach people to be solar installers. And each one of those groups were tasked to go back to their state and train at least 10 community members from low-income communities. In addition to that, New Alpha Community Development Corporation has inducted 6 of these training classes. So we've trained approximately 60 people from low-income communities to become solar installers, and some of them have gotten jobs with solar companies. So having done that, we also were involved with a project with Duke Energy, where we built a solar farm that was named after one of our partners, the Whitney M. Slater Foundation, providing solar energy for 1,200 homes in a rural, low-income community. And also realizing that we don't want to replicate engines of energy injustice. We also had 1,500 homes that receive free energy efficiency upgrades, because it doesn't matter if a person is heating and cooling the outdoors in an energy inefficient home. It doesn't matter if they're using fossil fuels or solar energy if they're just replicating energy burdens. And and finally, realizing that there would be a lot of barriers towards moving communities to doing small scale projects that are really at the root of just transition. We also, if it were not for COVID, in April of this year, we would be starting some solar projects in 12 small African villages in Sierra Leone and Liberia that have never had electricity. And lastly, this month, in about 2 weeks, we will have a ribbon cutting ceremony on a demonstration project here in Florence for high solar power hydroplanes, which a lot of technical information, but it literally draws moisture out of the air, condenses it. So when you go to the dispenser, you can pull out water. And we're going to track that over the next 9 to 12 months, so that this can be another way of having not only energy democracy, but also give people a source of clean water, particularly people who live in low-income communities with lead pipes, et cetera. So that's some of the work that we've done just in the area of solar and energy efficiency.
Wow. So it sounds like you're not only impacting people on an individual level, but you're striving to impact people on the international level too, and the national level.
Yes, absolutely. Mhm.
That is very impressive. I never would have thought about collecting rainwater to make sure, or not rainwater, but collecting moisture out of the air to make sure people have access to clean water. So
Mhm.
it sounds like you're hitting like, three birds with one stone here. Thank you very much, Reverend Leo. And
Yes.
Shiva, if I'm not mistaken, you tend to work with campaigns and like empowering people in the group level. Am I correct? Can you expand on what the work you do is?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm really fortunate to work in a variety of local, regional, and national coalitions to really advance energy justice and energy democracy. And today, I want to focus on one or two of those initiatives that I think is particularly relevant to this group of folks. And so, as a participant of the Tennessee Valley Energy Democracy Movement, I follow the leadership of folks like Bree Nisley at Appalachian Voices and other local and regional groups in the Tennessee Valley area. And that movement is, a coalition of organizations, community groups, and citizens working to bring democracy to the TVA energy system and really transform it from the bottom up. And so a lot of those efforts have been by, really reaching out to communities in the Tennessee Valley sort of energy footprint and asking directly, what they want, what the communities want for their energy future. And really those initial efforts really led to sort of this grassroots vision that is, what I think is really a foundation for that particular movement going forward. And there are a lot of really exciting resources. And one of the, I get to work with quite a few coalitions and whatnot across the country, but this is a particularly exciting one because, there's a lot of great work that has already been done, and there is a ton of work to still continue to do. And I want to point you, and I know I'll get some help with putting this in the chat, but one of the main website here is energydemocracyyall.org. And the /TN gets you to the Tennessee particular page. And so you'll see that in the chat in a minute, but there, you'll really see a lot of the resources that's come out of this movement and group of folks. And that includes, you know, a lot of the results from the Energy Democracy Community Listening Tour, right? So what I was mentioning about sort of a people's vision for TVA, you can see a lot of those, you know, those points. And you can also see more recent efforts around a memo to the Biden administration and the transitions team about, you know, what, you know, a just transition and what clean energy and equitable community-led future for the TVA can and should look like. You'll see resources where this group has also suggested nominees for the Tennessee Valley Authority Board. So again, you see this as an incredible, you know, group of community organizations and community leaders and individuals and allies, and they're coming up with very particular and multi-pronged strategies and solutions to really bring energy democracy to their region and to this region. And you'll also see some exciting, really exciting resources around electric co-op scorecards, where, you know, if you live in the TVA region and you get your electricity from a local electric provider, electric co-op, you'll be able to see some more detailed information about how your electricity co-op compares to others and how they're doing on things like clean energy and community participation. And more broadly, you'll also see, you know, a policy platform for energy democracy. And so, you know, it's an exciting, really exciting group of folks doing great work. And I think particularly with a new administration, there's going to be a lot more work to do. And I think it's a great example of what happens when you have really solid community engagement and community leadership really driving, you know, the work. And that should be looked to, right? And not only in that region, but in other regions as sort of a basis or as part of the solution to, right, this energy democracy future that we're talking about. So I'll leave it there for now, and happy to speak to some other initiatives later if we have some time.
Thank you so much. It really sounds like that you're putting the demos in democracy, Shiva, with the community empowerment that you're doing. Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Chandra, I do know that your work with Southern Equity is really focused on like empowering communities as well. Can you speak on the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we definitely take an approach that we partner to build power with communities versus empower, because communities inherently have power. So what are the strategies that are needed to help unlock that power? So we look at ourselves in some ways as technical assistance support, you know, in a lot of ways. So we focus on 5 strategies at Partnership for Southern Equity: coalition building, authentic community engagement. Always put authentic in front of that, so we're not looped in with, you know, like city planners and stuff with their checkbox engagement. Community leadership development, leveraging research and data, and community organizing. And as Reverend Woodberry, you know, demonstrates, it's also really about being able to, like, what is equity, right? You know, everybody loves to talk about it. It's very nice. It's a very pretty word, you know, but if we are really talking about what equity means, we are talking about transforming systems, turning them on their heads. And in order to do that, we have to address the root cause of systemic racism and white supremacy that is embedded in all of these 100-year-old systems, right? So we really begin with that. Sort of what we refer to as the PSE way is, number one, we lead with race, and that is how we begin our work. And coalition building is critical. You know, we have a Just Energy Circle, which is our longest running racial equity coalition. All of our 4 issue areas that I spoke about earlier have what we call an equity circle. And that's our space to bring together uncommon allies, if you will, right? The technical assistance people, the policy professionals, the environmental attorneys around the table with neighborhood groups, academia, faith-based groups, all working together to vision more equitable energy policy. So we have a policy and advocacy committee, we have an education and action committee, and we have an energize and connect committee, which is kind of the organizing arm of the circle. But also, when I talked about the equity ecosystem earlier and that theory of change, all of that has to constantly be informed by what the people are saying, right? The people who are first and most impacted by all of the things that we are talking about, the people who are experiencing these overlapping pain points every single day, right? Like somebody isn't worried about paying the rent on Monday, worried about paying their utility bills on Tuesday, worried about finding change in the sofa cushions to put gas in their car on Wednesday, and worried about getting fired from their job on Thursday because their kid's having an asthma attack and they don't have sick days. All of those things are constantly happening all the time. And so what are the pathways to power for people who are experiencing these acute systems of really inequitable systems? So our community organizers are building out equity hubs. And so as we've been talking about electric membership cooperatives, where we have organizers on the ground across Georgia, they're working with communities to build out equity hubs. So for Cobb EMC, for instance, the hub has been active for probably 4 or 5 years right now, and they have come together to decide who they want to run for the board of their electric membership cooperative. And they came together, decided on that person, and put all their resources into a campaign to support that person. They didn't have a win last time, but when you look at the awareness building and engagement of what it means to really have a direct line to democratizing energy, there's few places I feel like where that is more possible and more visible in a quicker way, if that's the right way you say it, than working through electric membership cooperatives. At a similar level, we have been able to do that work. Georgia has a public service commission, and fortunately, unfortunately, our public service commission is elected. So really over the last 9 months, really spurred on by COVID and the devastating impacts of people having their utilities shut off. And early on, you know, Shiva was a part of this. This is our sort of national no shutoffs coalition. I think many people on this call have probably signed off on and been one of the almost 2,000 people of organizations across the nation that have continued to push for a national shutoff moratorium on power, water, and broadband. And so our organizers, led by Juan Smith and some of our other organizing partners across the state, created what's called We the Plug Though. And it's sort of a play on plug, right? We need plug for electricity, but really this was about making sure people understand that they are the plugs in these holes, in these inequitable systems, right? So when we come together, we have the power to plug in and change our conditions by being active in these spaces that have been intentionally set up to exclude us from participating. So getting engaged at the Public Service Commission, making sure their calls. Our Public Service Commission has elections every 2 years. So now we've been able to build off of that from focusing on the utility moratorium work all the way through the election. And we don't do GOTV work. We are a 501c3. We do voter education only. And we focus our efforts on the Public Service Commission specifically. And we'll continue to do that. And then a final piece of that community power building is our Just Energy Academy. So Partnership for Southern Equity has a few community leadership development programs across our issue areas. And our Just Energy Academy, Cal Kreider is here. He's going to be a member of our 2021 class. It's a 7-month leadership development program focused on developing community leadership and community leadership in racial equity, but also the specifics of like energy and utilities, which is very complicated, right? I mean, most people's only interaction with utilities or energy is when they're paying their bill, or maybe having to pay somebody else's bill, like an aunt or an uncle, or supporting the church paying bills. So that education is like Energy 101, Energy Policy 101, regulatory structure, understanding the difference between an investor-owned utility, an EMC, and a municipal utility. And then also all of those participants, we have generally start out with 20-ish per year. This is our third year. They're all required to develop community projects. And so a lot of folks come to the Academy with projects, and as Partnership for Southern Equity, we're able to support them in developing those projects. Other people choose projects based on the modules that we're learning together over the 7 months. And then at graduation, that is when they present those projects. And we are able to provide small stipends. And though our Just Energy Academy participants and all of our Leadership Academy participants become extra capacity for us in our work. Like, these are the people that I call on to partner with me and get input on, and all of us throughout our organization. And that constant continuum of engagement is so critical, because energy, utilities, climate, these are generational issues, and it's a long game, right? Which is why a lot of the projects like that Reverend Woodberry mentioned, some of the projects that we're working on with the Atlanta University Center in Atlanta around sort of a microgrid community resilience hub, is an opportunity to demonstrate energy equity in action, if you will. So all of those things coming together are critically important and central to our strategies to build more power with communities.
Wow. There were several points in what you were talking about that made me just want to like get up and clap or something. I love how you brought up the point about like empowering communities, that communities already have power. That's something I want to reiterate here, and something that I think this entire workshop is based off of, is assuming and knowing that communities have power. But speaking of power, and this leads next to my next question, economic power and the economy in general. So this is directed to Reverend Leo and Shiva, but I want to know how energy democracy affects local economies. Like, I know that we're pushing because it is good for like communities, but is it good for the economy as well?
Well, it's good for the economy if you're a shareholder, if you're a part of a investor-owned utility. And it's good if you're part of the group that makes up the board of directors for an electric co-op. But in terms of regular, everyday people like ourselves, we usually wind up with a huge energy burden. So a classic example in South Carolina is when Santee Cooper and what was then what we call SCANA, actually wound up not building 2 nuclear reactors in Jenkinsville, South Carolina, and leaving their customers with a $9 billion tab that has to be paid off in terms of continuous rate hikes. But what I want to, if we're going to talk about economy, then let's look at why these unjust systems exist. Utilities are based off an economic model that's called oligarchical monopolies. That basically they say that if you have to build electric grids, et cetera, you have to spend so much money that in a competitive environment, there's no guarantee that you will get a return on your investment. That is why people have one utility, they don't have a choice. With electric cooperatives, they were formed because in rural areas, the utilities did not want to provide service because their formula is based on population density. So you wound up with electric co-ops who generally don't produce electricity, but what they do is buy it from the utilities. So those 2 models are what's driving the energy economy. But our position is that both of those models are outdated, because when we look at renewable energy, solar, wind, et cetera, they can exist in a competitive environment. And it's very important during the Biden administration that we don't allow these unjust, racist, economically non-viable systems to continue to be perpetuated. And one way that we believe that can be done is by looking at small scale projects that drive local economies and create equitable jobs and also provide entrepreneurial opportunities. So earlier I gave the example about the solar farm that we help work with Duke Energy to build and provide energy for 1,200 homes. Okay, so if we did small scale projects, I'm sure that we could do solar on rooftop solar ground arrays for 1,200 homes and provide jobs for everyday people. The model that we currently have in place now does not provide, at least in South Carolina, does not provide permanent jobs that pay a living wage. We had some folks who worked with us got jobs with the solar company. They built a solar farm in Orangeburg County, two solar farms in Orangeburg County. The people who worked for the company, right, that is not controlled by people in the community, paid $17 an hour. You had to pay for your own travel, your own meals, and your own hotel lodging while you were building. So you wound up getting paid next to nothing. They were actually employed by a temporary agency, which as soon as the solar farms were finished, they were laid off and told if they wanted another job, here's the phone number for the temp agency in Missouri. And if you can get to Missouri, then you'll have a job and you can continue to work. So it's very important that we dismantle, not just talk about, but come up with ways to dismantle the existing systems and come up with systems that drive the local economy and give green jobs and create entrepreneurial opportunities.
Yeah, it sounds like the key for for true energy democracy is to ensure that there's equitable and like permanent jobs that come from it, not just temporary fixes. Thank you, Rev Leo. I want to ask for Shiva's opinion, and also Chandra. I would love to hear. I meant to say your name earlier. I would love to hear your opinion about this too, because I think this directly correlates with your work. But first, Shiva.
Yeah, well, I'll keep it brief because I will say that Rev Woodberry, I think, has hit it on the head. I mean, that was really a history of the utility business model and really speaking through, right, the differences in the economic impacts. And I think that is it. So if we really just keep that in mind, and I'll add just one small thing before I pass it to Chandra, is that we need to keep focusing on those solutions that really do provide the long-term local benefits. And when we think about more local renewable energy projects, ones that are more community controlled, there's more community ownership, there is multiple spillover effects that we're not necessarily documenting. And so when more money is spent locally, right, when we're hiring locally, when we're building those relationships and not sending people to Missouri for their next job, right, there's positive economic impacts from having a more localized economic strategy. And so I do think, particularly in the next few years, this decade, there is going to be a lot of conversations and dialogue around utility scale or more distributed scale renewable energy and resources. And in my mind, I don't necessarily think it's one or the other, but I think it's very, very important to highlight that distributed energy resources and the more local forms provide multiple co-benefits and additional benefits that bring real economic equity and justice to communities. And so if we have this decision to be building all these new renewable energy resources, we have to understand that we can maximize benefits and be way more just, right, if we do it in this way more locally, as Rev Woodberry was laying out. And that really is a big part of energy democracy, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, we have to make sure that we're doing this in a local scale and ensuring that we're contributing to the local economy, especially since the South, we're one of the poorest regions. We are the poorest region in the nation. And we got to make sure that these jobs stay here and that we're helping our people out. Chandra, would you like to pitch in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think Reverend Woodberry and Shiva, really said it all. There is no racial justice without economic justice, right? There climate justice, utility justice, energy justice, economic justice, all of those things are required to fully realize this um, future of energy democracy. And the just transition framework, I think, is also critical in this process, because it particularly talks about just transition as a principle, a process, and a practice. And it's critical that we realize all of those things to make sure that we are not replacing the fossil fuel economy with the same conditions, but just cleaner energy. That's not just, and it's not just going to happen on its own.
I completely agree. I mean, this is an opportunity to really uproot these systems that have oppressed people for so long, since their inception. Well, that kind of leads to my next question of, this is so important that we have this energy democracy movement, but what are the biggest obstacles to achieving this? I originally wanted to ask like individual people, but honestly, I want to hear all of y'all's opinions if that's okay with y'all. But we could start off with Rev Leo again.
Well, the biggest obstacle that we have are the policies, the laws that are in place, and what happens, Well, as we said, well, energy democracy, the way it's structured in this country, is supposed to be driven by the people slash voters. And those legislators pass, they put policies in place. And then we have the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and PERC for the utilities. And then on the state level, you have your offices of energy and regulatory services and public service commissions, etc. And all of those structures are in place, but they're primarily put in place to serve these large utilities and co-ops that only work on macro solutions, not the micro solutions that we need on the local level, whose aggregate results can be just as powerful as what's happening on a macro level, on a large scale level. So that's one of the things that we need to look at in terms of obstacles. So you have states that have renewable portfolios like North Carolina, then you have states like South Carolina that have no renewable energy portfolios. You have states like in California that allow communities to pretty easily do small scale projects. And then you have states that actually have obstacles in place for that. We just had the Energy Freedom Act passed in South Carolina in 2020, which for the first time should allow us to do small scale projects. There's one sentence in there that we think cracks the door. But that's the biggest obstacle that we have is the policies and the regulations in place. And if we have the right people in place, I hate to say this, but the right people in place to put policies together on a federal and state level, that would open a lot of doors. I'm very thankful for the Biden administration for the executive orders that he's putting in place. But let's understand that executive orders are not bills, they're not legislation. And we've already learned from the previous 4 years that depending on who sits in the Oval Office, all of those gains can be easily erased virtually by a stroke of a pen. And so I would say those are the greatest obstacles. When we first began our work back in 2015, in terms of working on how do we create solar projects that are just, we knew that there were so many obstacles in place that we purposely, for 5 years, conducted what we call the Global South Summit at the Church Center for the United Nations in Manhattan. And we purposely partnered with Agricultural Missions Incorporated, of which I am the board chair, just like I'm the board chair for Southeast Climate and Energy Network. But we purposely created a pathway outside of this country where there weren't obstacles in place. So hopefully when the day came when the doors flew open for small scale projects, we could be at the front of the line saying we already have experience. So it's the policy and the regulations that are the greatest obstacles and barriers. Oh, let me throw in a third one. Funding.
Yes.
Funders. Let's fund actual projects on the ground in communities. We know we have to talk, but enough with summits, enough with conferences, enough with Zoom calls. It's time now to move beyond talk into action. The entire world, I'm gonna shorten it. The entire world right now is in an era of implementation, whether we're talking about the Paris Agreement, the COP with the United Nations, the European Union talking about putting together a regional Green New Deal, the Green New Deal or policies we want to put in place in the United States, the RGGI states who are working on renewable energy, the states that have renewable portfolios, the over 160 cities that have signed resolutions to go 100% renewable. There's only one place that implementation is not happening, and that is on the community level. And so it's time for the funders to walk the walk and not talk the talk until we can get federal funding.
I was literally about to say they got to start walking the walk. You took the words right out of my mouth. And as a policy nerd myself, I completely agree. Shiva, Chandra, do y'all have anything to add? I know Leo covered a lot, so but there's always we do have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say real quick that I mean, I agree with Rev Woodberry. I mean, and I think just linking a couple things to that, you know, obstacle and potential solution, right, is the fact that we still have, you know, underlying and systemic racial and economic injustice, right? And that shows up fundamentally in our lives, in our communities. And you can't just wish that away. You can't talk that away. Like Rev Woodberry is saying, you've got to fundamentally alter the policies and the laws to allow for specifically, you know, in this conversation, right? How do we allow for the just transition? How do we make sure, and I'm seeing some things in the chat, which I totally agree with, is that when we have rooftop solar or community solar, we got to make sure that the policies and programs are accessible, affordable, that they're being tailored with our communities in mind. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, right? So that level of intentionality has to happen, and it has to happen because there are these underlying issues. And I would just say as well, lift up the whole sort of funding and investments piece of this, particularly in the next few years with this administration. We have to ensure that we are really directing, you know, the majority of these funds to the communities who not only need it the most, who have been impacted the most, and that we're building products and solutions and policies that are tailored to these communities' needs and not just generically like we've been currently mostly doing. And so as we continue this transition into clean energy, I really do think not only we have to move more money and fix the policies, but we have to do it with a level of intentionality that has just not been there. And that will have to continue.
Yes, I 100% agree. We have to be intentional here, and we have to include in communities with this. Chandra, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, a lot has been said. I agree with it all. And, the biggest barriers, capitalism and monopolies, right? I mean, these are, and that's real. I know capitalism is, it's one of those things like white supremacy now that people are talking about. It's kind of become the thing to say, but it's true. There's a reason that we are talking about it. I mean, it is a huge barrier. And I think the more that we are able to connect those really huge philosophical, economic barriers to the reason that we talk about community and local control so much. And I was just on Catalyst Miami, is another great partner of ours, and lots of others here doing really wonderful work down in Miami. They had their Poverty Solutions Summit towards the last week. And there was a session around community energy. You know, we were really able to sort of talk about and define what that means. It was a part of a track around community controlled initiatives. And the day before our panel, Shalonda Baker, who many of you may have heard of, she started the Institute for Energy Justice up at Northeastern. She's now a deputy director at the DOE for energy justice, like first time ever. Like, what an incredible, just so much possibility with that. And her recent book that she was talking about called Revolutionary Power. And as I was listening to that to get ready, something that she said really struck with me, as it often does, is that community energy, just energy, you know, and I'm paraphrasing here, but utility justice, energy, it's really about upending our idea of what is possible. And we talk about vision a lot at Partnership for Southern Equity. We start all of our partnerships, all of our projects with a session around vision. How do we get together and come together on creating a shared vision? And then that process is immediately followed by developing a set of shared values. We can no longer pretend that we can jump to a solution without making sure we are all on the same page about why we are doing something and why is it important, who are we going to prioritize, and why we are going to prioritize them. Anything that supports Black people, Indigenous people, poor people, women, supports everybody, right? So we have to get past this idea of somebody taking something away from another, or it's just not going to happen. If you are doing something for a marginalized group, it is going to support everybody. So I think we just need to have some truth telling and come together around some of these things and to say, this is what we have to do. And ultimately, this is going to help everybody. So just let us focus on this right now.
Yeah. I mean, it is completely vital that we have to be on the same page, and we need to mobilize towards this and have the shared values. So thank you very, very much. And I did have one more question, but since we are running out of time, I wanted to ensure that everyone here has a chance to ask any questions before we go. So Kendall, if I'm not mistaken, is it if somebody raises their hand or somebody can put it in the chat questions? Okay, awesome. Well, I will wait a little bit. Okay. So we have a question real quick. Okay. So I just got a message that said, question to the panel, can energy democracy be a force for creating more stable energy grids? With a move towards electric cars, more charging stations and a stable energy grid are very important. Soon e-cars will not just be the toys of the well-off. I love that. Yes. Yeah. So in summary, how do y'all see energy democracy ensuring that we have stable energy, period? And any of the three can jump in. So feel welcome. And please make sure they're unmuted as well if they need to jump in.
Okay. Well, I'll say yes, it can contribute towards a more stable energy economy. And we have to do it through distribution, and we have to stay on top of things. So when the lawsuit, when Volkswagen, when the Volkswagen money was allocated across the country, in South Carolina, we advocated for more charging stations in communities. We did not win. The majority of those charging stations went along the interstates, where they said, oh, this is where the biggest footprint is, dirty energy footprint is. And our response was that if there are no charging stations in communities, particularly poor and people of color communities, no one is going to want to drive all the way to, to a charging station on an interstate to charge their car. And so once again, is it's very important that we look at who's making the decisions and make sure that environmental justice and other organizations that work towards energy democracy are at the table on all levels when planning is being put in place, decision making occurs, allocation of resources, implementation, and evaluation. That we can't leave out one of those things and be able to have people power and to make the changes that we need.
Thank you, Leo. Chandra, would you like to jump in, or Shiva?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not, a technical grid operator opinion here, but when we are talking about centralized versus decentralized, right? The quicker you can get to something, the more immediate access you have to something, the quicker and more efficient your ability is to respond, right? So energy democracy, somebody in the chat was talking about microgrids. I mean, batteries, all of these decentralized distributed energy possibilities that we are talking about on a real community level, not like a lot of utilities like to do and co-opt community solar when that's not even what we are talking about. So I'm real particular about saying neighborhood level, neighborhood scale distributed energy systems, I think are critical. We started this conversation talking about how old these systems are, right? I mean, there was a funny article about telephone poles, and there was a picture of this telephone pole. I mean, it was literally from like 1937 because they can tell because of like, the plates that are on them. This is what we are dealing with. And we are going to need a national mobilization with international support to really move this. And I think the more that we continue to call for this and talk about this, like, and look at things like it wasn't the best, there's obviously the problems, like the kind of mobilization that went through like the interstate system, or, originally building out the grid. I mean, that is the level of investment. It's something like what, $42 trillion or something like that is going to be needed over the next decade to really shift our infrastructure to even just get us to the point of being ready for what we are talking about. So I think those are definitely some of the things that we need to be, particularly when we're talking about federal level work and like TVA, the things that we need to be talking to them about, while also talking to our utilities and EMCs about what needs to be happening, on that community level scale.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, history will keep repeating itself until we learn from it. And the fact that there's those like old newspaper like memes of like, this is the future if we have these electric like, telephone poles and stuff like that. And it's like people trapped in all the wires and stuff. And it's the same exact argument against renewable energy and energy democracy in general. Shiva, do you have anything to add? I saw you put something in the chat.
Yeah, let me just add real quick, and maybe we can squeeze in one more question. But I totally agree with what has just been said, and I will add that when we talk about grid stability, right? We've talked, Chandra and Rev Woodberry have laid out some technical, literally some solutions and products to get at that. And I just want to add that there's a social element as well, right? Like part of grid stability, believe it or not, comes from having like the right people in charge of the decisions, right? Of where we procure our electricity, how we manage it, what we do when there is a blackout or a grid failure. And I don't want to get to all of those details, but just want to highlight the importance of having folks from the community and diverse communities and our communities, right, in those positions of power to literally control the energy supply, right, and manage and make those decisions. And that's also a part of grid stability, because what ends up happening, right, when the grid goes off, we know, or if there's some issue, the effects, the negative effects are never equal. And they'll hit certain communities, most likely communities of color and low income, much harder. And one particular way, right, is to definitely the distributed energy resources. And right, how do we make sure that the people in charge, the decision makers, are also making sure that within all the other decisions in managing the grid and updating the grid, et cetera, right, that we're putting all communities, and particularly the most vulnerable communities, at top of mind when it comes to grid stability.
Yeah, that's yes, 100% yes. I really thank you, Shiva. I'm kind of speechless by everyone's just expertise and knowledge. I have so much to learn, so thank y'all very much. And if y'all want, we can squeeze in one more question, or if y'all want to stick around, but if not, feel free, since the workshop is technically over, jump off. But please also feel free to stay as well. Oh, wait just a second. Okay, awesome. I saw several questions in the chat, and this will be the last one, so we don't hold people. But it was from Rev Michael, and I love this. And it says, how do we ensure that funding gets allocated to the most vulnerable communities first? I know that with COVID, it's really highlighted the inequities within our society. So I would love to hear y'all's knowledge and opinion about how do we ensure funding gets allocated to the communities? And y'all can just jump in whenever.
Yeah, I'll go first. Well, while we're talking about other systems that are not just and that are based on systems of racial injustice and a lack of equity, this also applies to the philanthropic community. And that's where a lot of the problems lie. And that means that we have to break some of the false narratives that are in place. For example, we can only give so much money to community-based organizations because they don't have the capacity to manage funding past a certain level. Well, tell you what, if you give us enough money, we'll hire the same people that you use in order to have financial management and increase our financial management capacity. So we have to break some of these. And then for us, we have to stop causing division among our own selves. We have to stop competing for the same small pie. We have to come together in solidarity and say, it's not a matter of you deciding whether you're going to fund this Black organization, looking at BIPOC. Oh, we're going to fund this Black organization rather than this Indigenous organization, rather than this people of color organization. Instead, we need to say across the board, you know what? You want to give $1 million away, then get your philanthropic network and give everyone $1 million. Or look at it from a geographical perspective and say, how about we just give $5 billion that each of the 12 states in the southeast region of this country, that's the poorest region in the country, that is the least funded region in the country, that is experiencing more climate impacts and has more polluting facilities. So we have to get away from this divisive thing among ourselves. Should they fund the Gulf Coast, or should they fund the South, or should they fund the Mid-Atlantic? No, we need funding across this entire country and around the world. And we're only going to get that if we do away with the false narratives and we ask for funding for everyone. So we need to usher in what we call the era of the iron will. We have to be firm. We have to implement with resoluteness and original thought, novel approaches. And if we stand together, particularly at this point in time in history, we can move all of our communities forward, all of our states, all of our regions forward. But on our side, we have to get away from the spirit of divisiveness and competitiveness, which is actually holding us back. And finally, I'll say this. We are the last generations that can actually do something to mitigate and lessen the impacts of climate change for future generations. So if we do not stand up and exercise an iron will, in the future, generations will not just look at the fossil fuel companies. They will not just look at the political powers. They're going to look to us as well. They're going to look at us as well. and say we weren't a part of the solution that could have been, but instead we were a part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, like you talked about us fighting over the small pieces of pie when clearly there's enough resources to make more pies for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Shiva, Chandra, do y'all have any final thoughts about this?
I think Reverend Woodberry said it all. I think that's a great way to close. I think we can't fall for that okey doke. Okay, there's plenty of pie for everybody, right? I mean, there's plenty of this, and I think that many of us knew that the decades of work, like Reverend Woodberry and so many, environmental justice leaders have been doing for decades, is we're seeing the results of a lot of that now, but that doesn't mean we are finished. That means we have a better place to start. And, I was just reading, people are very excited about, Reverend Woodberry talked about this, the Biden executive orders and things like that, and the Justice 40 commitment. But, how do we define disadvantage? How do we do, it's like, no, like we got to get in there and be like, we know exactly, race is the #1 indicator for the location of a toxic facility. Boom, what else do you need? The number way to tell someone doesn't have access to a tap for water is race. Like, let's just dispense with the confusion here. Like, we know exactly what to do. We know exactly where we can prioritize these dollars. So let's, for all of our communities, I was very excited to see Heidi Campbell, a legislator. Everybody's excited about Georgia's 2 new senators. Like, I've got to get on top of my game, make sure I'm pressuring them, and all the work we've got to do at the state level, we've just got to do more of it at the federal level.
Agreed. I really want to repeat the statement that you just said that said, we are not finished. We just have a better place to start. I love that. All right. Well, if Shiva doesn't have anything to say, all right. Thank y'all so much for this fantastic hour and like 10 minutes. Thank you. And thank you all participants for listening and giving us your time. It really means the world to us. So thank y'all so much and have a great day. Bye, y'all.
Yeah.